Welcome, curious minds, to another deep dive. Today, we're embarking on a journey back to a really pivotal time in American history. It's often called securing the Republic.
Right, roughly that period from 1789 to 1815, the Constitution was new, kind of untested, and the country was really figuring out what freedom meant.
Exactly. Imagine there's this painting described in Foner's Give Me Liberty,
Sure.
our main source today from around the War of 1812. It's got, the goddess of liberty, a broken chain, a fallen crown.
All these symbols packed with meaning about freedom.
But the big questions were, whose freedom? And, at what cost? We're sticking close to Foner's text here, so you get the core story clearly.
That's the plan. Our mission today is to navigate these, well, turbulent waters of early American politics. We'll trace how this big experiment in self-government faced its first major tests.
And how those competing ideas about freedom clashed.
Precisely, and how events happening way across the Atlantic profoundly shaped the young nation's identity. We'll walk you through the main developments, the conflicts, the turning points.
Making sure you grasp not just what happened, but crucially, why it mattered so much. So let's dive in.
All right, where do we start?
Well, our story really kicks off on April 30th, 1789. New York City, the temporary capital. George Washington takes the oath of office.
And he truly believed this whole venture was an experiment of enormous historical importance. He even said the preservation of the sacred fire of liberty depended on its success. A lot riding on it.
You can feel the weight. Maintaining political harmony was, well, paramount for these early leaders.
Yeah.
Washington famously warned against faction.
Right, organized political parties. He saw them as deeply divisive, a threat.
Yet, almost immediately, national political parties did emerge.
Yeah.
The 1790s became, as one historian put it, an age of passion. Intense stuff.
Very intense. And at the heart of these early divisions, Alexander Hamilton's financial plan. He was Washington's Treasury Secretary, and his proposals between 1790 and 91 really lit the fuse.
So what was Hamilton actually trying to achieve with this plan? It sounds pretty central.
Oh, it was huge. His aims were ambitious, to say the least. He wanted financial stability, sure, but also to get the powerful financial interests invested literally in the new government.
Yeah, and to spur economic development.
Yes, absolutely. His ultimate goal, really, was to transform the U.S. into a major commercial and military power. He felt the Articles of Confederation were just too weak for the nation to achieve greatness. He was looking at models like Great Britain.
Okay, so how did he plan to do all that? What were the key pieces?
Well, there were 5 main parts. First, creditworthiness. The federal government would assume all the war debt, national and state debts, and promise to pay it off at full face value. Build trust.
Makes sense.
What else? Second, a new national debt. Old debts would be replaced by new interest-bearing bonds. This gave the wealthy, the bondholders, a direct stake in the government's survival.
Clever, if controversial.
Definitely. Third, the Bank of the United States, established in 1791. This was modeled on the Bank of England, a private corporation acting as the government's financial agent, holding funds, issuing currency, making loans.
Number 4.
A whiskey tax. A direct tax on producers to raise revenue.
Ooh, I bet that went over well in some areas.
We'll get to that. And finally, his report on manufacturers in 1791. This pushed for tariffs on imports and government subsidies to encourage American factories, a vision for an industrial future.
It's fascinating how this immediately split people. Hamilton wanted close ties with Britain, right? Our main trading partner.
He did. But figures like James Madison and Thomas Jefferson had a totally different vision. They saw the future in westward expansion, an agrarian republic of independent farmers. That, to them, was the heart of American liberty.
So Hamilton's plan looked dangerous to them.
Extremely. They feared it was creating this unhealthy alliance between the central government and wealthy capitalists. It sounded too much like the British system. They've just fought a revolution against prone to corruption, they thought.
And Jefferson had specific constitutional objections, too.
Yes, especially to the bank. He argued creating a bank wasn't a power explicitly listed in the Constitution. This fueled the rise of the strict constructionists, mainly in the South, who insisted the federal government could only do what the Constitution specifically said it could do.
The debates must have been fierce. I mean, paying off old bonds at full value.
Yeah.
What about the original holders?
Exactly. That was a major sticking point. Many original bondholders, soldiers often, had sold their bonds cheap during hard times to speculators. Now, Hamilton's plan meant the speculators got rich, while the original patriots got nothing. It felt deeply unfair to many.
And that whiskey tax.
It hit backcountry farmers hard. Distilling grain into whiskey was often the only way they could transport their crops to market profitably. So this tax felt like it was targeting them specifically, benefiting Eastern merchants.
So how did they resolve this initial clash?
Through the famous Jefferson-Hamilton bargain of 1790, basically a compromise, Southerners, led by Jefferson and Madison, agreed to Hamilton's financial plan except for the manufacturing subsidies. In exchange, the permanent national capital would be located on the Potomac River, between Maryland and Virginia, a southern location.
Which became Washington, D.C.
That's the one,
Huh.
designed by Pierre-Charles L'Enfant. Though the irony, as Foner points out, is that much of the physical labor building this capital of liberty was done by enslaved people.
A stark contradiction right there at the foundation.
And while that bargain brought a temporary calm, maybe, things were about to get even more heated because of events overseas.
You mean the French Revolution?
Exactly. It starts in 1789, and initially almost all Americans are cheering it on. They see it as, an echo of their own fight for liberty.
But then it takes a radical turn.
It does. By 1793, King Louis VI is executed, France declares war on Great Britain, and things get bloody. This forced Americans to grapple with it, even as Washington tried to declare neutrality.
So people started taking sides.
Definitely. Jefferson and his followers, who are starting to be called Republicans, they still saw the French Revolution, despite the violence, as fundamentally a win for popular self-government. They adopted French styles, liberty poles.
But the other side.
Washington, Hamilton, and their supporters, the Federalists, they saw it descending into anarchy, mob rule, a threat to stability and order everywhere.
And this European war directly impacts the U.S., right? Especially at sea.
Oh, absolutely. Britain starts seizing American ships trading with the French West Indies, and they resume the practice of impressment.
That's the kidnapping of sailors.
Yes, forcing them into the British Navy, often claiming they were British deserters, whether they were or not. Thousands of American sailors were taken. It was deeply resented.
So how did the U.S. respond to Britain?
Well, Washington sent John Jay, the Chief Justice, to negotiate. The result was Jay's Treaty in 1794.
Was it a good deal?
Not really from the Republican perspective. Britain agreed to finally abandon some Western forts they were supposed to have left years ago. But, critically, they made zero concessions on impressment or neutral shipping rights.
And what did the U.S. give up?
We granted Britain most favored nation status for trade. So essentially preferential treatment for British imports.
So the Republicans must have hated it.
They despised it. They felt it aligned the U.S. with monarchical Britain against Republican France. It basically threw fuel on the fire of political division.
And Foner points out this treaty is really what solidifies the two parties.
It's a key moment, yes. By the mid-1790s, you have two distinct, organized, and often openly hostile political parties. The Federalists, backing Washington and Hamilton, generally pro-British, favoring hierarchy and order, and the Republicans, following Jefferson and Madison, pro-French, pushing for more democratic participation.
How did the Federalists view democracy generally?
They were wary. They often came from more elite backgrounds, merchants, lawyers. They believed in government by the elite, for the people maybe, but not by the people directly. They feared too much democracy could lead to chaos or licentiousness, as they put it.
And the Whiskey Rebellion seemed to confirm their fears.
It did for them. When those Pennsylvania farmers protested the whiskey tax, using symbols from the Revolution like liberty poles, the Federalists saw it as insurrection.
And Washington's response was strong.
Incredibly strong. He dispatched 13,000 militia, a larger army than he often commanded during the Revolution, to put it down. It was a clear message about federal authority.
And the Republicans, where did their support come from?
They drew support from a broader base. Southern planters, yes, but also ordinary farmers across the country, urban artisans, immigrants. They were generally more critical of social and economic inequality and much more comfortable with broad democratic participation.
This sounds like a really politically charged atmosphere.
It was. The public sphere expanded dramatically. More people went to political meetings, read newspapers. The number of newspapers just exploded in the 1790s.
And what about those democratic Republican societies?
Right. These popped up around 1793-94, inspired by the Jacobin clubs in France. There were nearly 50 of them. These Self-created societies, as Federalists dismissively called them, fiercely defended the people's right to debate politics and influence policy.
They saw liberty as needing constant popular involvement.
Exactly. Not just voting every few years, they championed freedom of opinion as a fundamental right. Although the Federalists blamed them for the Whiskey Rebellion and they faded by 1795, their spirit really got absorbed into the Republican Party, helping legitimize that idea of broad citizen participation.
It's interesting, too, how this era sparked discussions about women's rights.
It did. You had Mary Wollstonecraft's Vindication of the Rights of Woman, published in England in '92, arguing for women's education, employment, even hinting at political rights.
And in America.
Judith Sargent Murray wrote her essay on the equality of the sexes in 1790, arguing women deserved equal education to use their talents fully. While the Constitution still basically assumed politics was for men, these ideas, combined with the general political ferment, were broadening the discussion about who belonged in public life.
Okay, so Washington steps down after 2 terms, setting that precedent. What happens in the 1796 election?
It's the first contested presidential election. Federalist John Adams narrowly beats the Republican Thomas Jefferson.
And because of the rules back then.
Jefferson, as the runner-up, becomes Adams's vice president. Talk about an awkward situation. Adams inherits a deeply divided nation.
And his presidency faces immediate crises.
Right away. Internationally, there's this undeclared naval war with France, the Quasi-War, partly fueled by the XYZ affair in 1797.
That's the one where French officials demanded bribes.
Yes, just to even start diplomatic negotiations, Americans were outraged. Adams actually managed to negotiate peace by 1800, but the domestic scene was boiling over.
Because of the Alien and Sedition Acts?
Precisely. This is the biggest crisis of his presidency, happening in 1798. These were Federalist laws explicitly aimed at silencing their opponents.
What did they do, specifically?
Well, the Naturalization Act made it harder to become a citizen, extending the residency requirement from 5 years to 14, aimed largely at immigrants who often favored Republicans. The Alien Act allowed the president to deport any non-citizen deemed dangerous.
And the Sedition Act. That sounds the most alarming.
It was. It basically criminalized almost any public criticism of the federal government, the president, or Congress.
Right.
Writing, printing, uttering false or malicious things. It was incredibly broad.
A direct assault on free speech. Jefferson called it a reign of witches.
He did. And it wasn't just talk. Several Republican newspaper editors were actually prosecuted and convicted. Matthew Lyon, a Republican congressman from Vermont, was jailed for criticizing Adams.
How did the Republicans fight back against this?
Madison and Jefferson drafted the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions. Madison's Virginia resolution argued that the Sedition Act was unconstitutional and called on federal courts to protect free speech.
And Jefferson's Kentucky resolution.
His original draft went even further. It asserted that states had the right to nullify, basically declare void federal laws they deemed unconstitutional. That part was actually removed, but the idea was planted.
Did other states support these resolutions?
No, not at the time. But they were hugely important statements reinforcing the idea that freedom of discussion was absolutely essential to American liberty and raising the question of states' rights versus federal power.
This all sets the stage for the election of 1800.
Oh, yeah. Often called the Revolution of 1800. Republicans mobilized voters like never before under the slogan, Jefferson and Liberty. Jefferson defeated Adams.
But it wasn't straightforward, right? There was a tie.
A major constitutional glitch. Jefferson tied in the Electoral College with his own running mate, Aaron Burr. So the election went to the House of Representatives, which was still controlled by Federalists.
What a mess. How was it resolved?
It took 36 ballots. It was a real nail-biter. Ultimately, Alexander Hamilton, Jefferson's longtime rival, played a key role. He disliked Jefferson immensely, but saw Burr as truly dangerous and unprincipled. He urged Federalists to back Jefferson.
Wow. Hamilton helps Jefferson win.
Strange bedfellows, right? Jefferson wins, and this whole episode leads directly to the 12th Amendment, ensuring electors vote separately for president and vice president to prevent this kind of tie again.
And Adams steps down peacefully.
Which was huge. It established that vital precedent of peaceful transfer of power between opposing parties, a cornerstone of American democracy.
But Foner points out a really uncomfortable truth about Jefferson's victory.
Yes. Jefferson saw it as a triumph for freedom, but his victory literally depended on slavery. He swept the South's electoral votes, and those votes were inflated because of the 3/5 clause, counting enslaved people for representation. Without those extra votes derived from slavery, Adams would have won.
It just highlights that deep contradiction again.
It does, and the issue wasn't going away. Despite early petitions for emancipation, Congress avoided the topic. They even passed a federal fugitive slave law in 1793.
And the Haitian Revolution looms large here, too.
Immensely. From 1791 to 1804, enslaved people in the French colony of Saint-Domingue, led by Toussaint Louverture, fought and won their independence, creating Haiti.
An inspiration for enslaved people in the U.S.
Definitely. But for white Americans, especially slaveholders, it was terrifying. It fueled intense fears of slave insurrection. When Jefferson became president, his administration actively worked to isolate Haiti, refusing to recognize its independence.
And those fears weren't just abstract. There was Gabriel's Rebellion.
Right, in 1800 in Richmond, Virginia, Gabriel, an enslaved blacksmith, organized a significant plot. The plan was for slaves to march on the Capitol, seize weapons, maybe take the governor hostage, and demand abolition. The plot was discovered just before it could launch, betrayed by other slaves. Gabriel and 25 others were executed. The aftermath saw Virginia drastically tighten its slave codes, restricting gatherings, making it harder for owners to free slaves, and requiring freed slaves to leave the state.
So Jefferson takes office in this climate. Washington, D.C. is the new capital, but it's barely built.
Right. Foner describes it as this kind of muddy, unfinished village. Jefferson's inaugural address tries to be conciliatory. We are all Republicans. We are all Federalists, trying to bridge the divide.
And what were his policy priorities? Did he dismantle the Federalist system?
He tried. He pardoned those jailed under the Sedition Act. He significantly reduced the number of government employees, slashed the Army and Navy budgets, abolished all internal taxes, including that whiskey tax, relying only on the tariff and land sales for revenue. He focused on paying down the national debt.
So really trying to shrink the federal government.
Yes, minimizing federal power and economic oversight. He wanted to ensure the U.S. didn't become that centralized European-style state Hamilton had envisioned.
But federal power didn't just vanish. What about the courts?
Ah, yes. While Jefferson was president, the Federalist Chief Justice John Marshall was busy establishing the power of the Supreme Court. The key case is Marbury v. Madison in 1803.
That's the one that established judicial review.
Exactly. The court, for the first time, declared an act of Congress unconstitutional. This established the principle of judicial review, the court's power to decide if laws passed by Congress or the states violate the Constitution. A huge expansion of judicial power.
So even as Jefferson tries to limit federal power, the judiciary is expanding it.
A bit of an irony there. And speaking of irony, Jefferson's biggest achievement as president involved a massive expansion of federal power and territory.
The Louisiana Purchase.
The Louisiana Purchase of 1803, this absolutely enormous territory stretching from the Gulf Coast up to Canada, Mississippi River west to the Rockies. Napoleon offered to sell it all to the U.S.
Why did Napoleon?
Largely because his plans for a North American empire had crumbled, mainly due to his inability to reconquer Haiti after the revolution there. He needed cash for his European wars.
But Jefferson, the strict constructionist. The Constitution says nothing about buying foreign territory.
Precisely his dilemma. He actually admitted he had done an act beyond the Constitution, but he believed the opportunity was too good to pass up. For $15 million, about 3 cents an acre, he doubled the size of the United States.
Incredible. He saw it as securing the nation's agrarian future.
Yes, ensuring there would be land for independent farmers for generations, which he thought was key to preserving liberty and stability. It also removed France as a potential rival on the continent.
And then he sent Lewis and Clark to explore it.
Right, the Lewis and Clark expedition from 1804 to 1806. Meriwether Lewis and William Clark led their corps of discovery, guided by Sacagawea, a Shoshone woman. They went all the way to the Pacific, studying the geography, plants, animals, establishing relations with native tribes.
And reinforcing that idea of westward expansion.
Absolutely. Though incorporating Louisiana wasn't simple. New Orleans, for instance, had a diverse population, including many free people of color who actually had more rights under French and Spanish rule. American rule often meant fewer rights for them, and the quick imposition of harsh slave codes in the territory.
Another uncomfortable reality. Now, even with limited government ideals, foreign policy kept pulling Jefferson back towards using federal power, right? Like the Barbary Wars.
Yes, the Barbary Wars, 1801 to 1805. Pirates from North African states, the Barbary states, were demanding tribute from trading nations, including the U.S. Jefferson refused increased demands, leading to a naval conflict.
America's first overseas war, really.
Pretty much. It involved a blockade. A famous Marine landing at Tripoli to the shores of Tripoli in the Marine hymn comes from this. It protected American commerce, but also shaped early American views of the Islamic world.
But the much bigger foreign policy challenge was the renewed war between Britain and France.
Oh, definitely. By 1806, both countries established blockades, seizing hundreds of American ships caught in the middle, and the British resumed impressment aggressively. Over 6,000 American sailors were seized by 1807.
How did Jefferson respond this time?
He tried peaceable coercion. Believing access to American trade was vital for Britain and France, he pushed Congress to pass the Embargo Act of 1807.
Which did what?
It banned all American ships from sailing to foreign ports, an incredible use of federal power for Jefferson, the limited government guy. The idea was to pressure Britain and France by denying them American goods.
Did it work?
Not really. It mostly devastated the American economy, especially in port cities. Exports plummeted by 80%. But Britain and France found other markets or just ramped up smuggling. It was deeply unpopular and eventually repealed just before Jefferson left office.
So Jefferson leaves office on a bit of a low note. His successor is James Madison.
Yes, Jefferson's hand-picked successor wins easily in 1808. But the shipping crisis continues. Madison tries different approaches. In 1810, Macon's Bill No. 2 basically said the U.S. would trade with both Britain and France, but if one stopped interfering with U.S. ships, the U.S. would reimpose an embargo on the other one.
Like a diplomatic game.
Sort of. Napoleon cleverly announced France would repeal its decrees, though he didn't really stop seizing ships. Britain didn't follow suit, so Madison reimposed the embargo just on Britain in 1812. Tensions were rising fast.
And there's a new group in Congress pushing for war.
Yes, the war hawks. A younger generation of congressmen, mainly from the West and South, like Henry Clay and John C. Calhoun, they were fired up about national honor, British insults at sea.
But they also had other goals.
Oh, yeah. They talked about annexing Canada and conquering Florida, which was then Spanish territory, but also a haven for fugitive slaves and hostile Seminole Indians. Britain and Spain were allies against Napoleon, so hitting Spain felt like hitting Britain, too.
And tensions with Native Americans in the West were also escalating.
Critically, Jefferson's policy had been to encourage tribes to assimilate or move west of the Mississippi, often using debt to force land sales. Many Native leaders resisted.
Like Tecumseh and Tenskwatawa.
Exactly. Two Shawnee brothers who mounted a major resistance movement. Tecumseh, the chief, was a brilliant strategist and orator. He argued for common land ownership. Sell a country, why not sell the air? Tenskwatawa, known as the Prophet, urged a complete rejection of white culture and a return to traditional ways. They tried to unite many tribes.
What happened to their movement?
American forces under William Henry Harrison attacked and destroyed their main settlement, Prophetstown, at the Battle of Tippecanoe in 1811, while Tecumseh was away recruiting allies.
Did the British support Tecumseh?
Americans certainly believed they did, providing arms and encouragement. This, combined with the ongoing seizures of ships and impressment, finally pushed Madison to ask Congress for a declaration of war against Britain in June 1812.
Was it a popular decision?
Deeply divisive. The vote for war was the closest in American history. Federalists, especially in New England, were strongly opposed, fearing the impact on trade and seeing it as a Republican power grab. The country went to war deeply disunited.
So the War of 1812 begins. How did it go for the U.S. initially?
Badly. The U.S. was unprepared militarily and financially. Early attempts to invade Canada were failures. The British Navy blockaded the coast, crippling trade.
And Britain eventually defeated Napoleon.
Right. By 1814, Britain should focus its full attention on the U.S. They launched an invasion, captured Washington, D.C., and famously burned the Capitol building and the White House. President Madison had to flee. It was a low point.
But there were American successes, too.
There were. Mostly naval victories early on, like the USS Constitution, Old Ironsides defeating the Guerriere. Commodore Perry won a key battle on Lake Erie in 1813, securing the Northwest.
And Fort McHenry.
That's the big one in 1814. The British bombardment of Fort McHenry, defending Baltimore, failed. Francis Scott Key, watching from a British ship where he was negotiating prisoner release, saw the flag still flying the next morning and wrote the poem that became the Star-Spangled Banner.
The war was also fought against Britain's Indian allies, right?
Yes, it was a brutal war on the frontier. Tecumseh was killed fighting alongside the British at the Battle of the Thames in Canada in 1813, a major blow to native resistance.
And Andrew Jackson emerges as a key figure.
Absolutely. In 1814, Andrew Jackson led American forces, including Cherokee allies, to a devastating victory over hostile Creek Indians, the Red Sticks, at the Battle of Horseshoe Bend in Alabama. The Creeks were forced to cede huge amounts of land.
And then his most famous battle.
The Battle of New Orleans in January 1815, Jackson led a diverse force, regular soldiers, militia, frontiersmen, free black men he recruited, and inflicted a crushing defeat on veteran British forces trying to seize the city.
But the peace treaty had already been signed.
Ironically, yes. The Treaty of Ghent was signed in Belgium in December 1814, ending the war. News traveled slow back then. The treaty essentially restored the status quo antebellum, the situation before the war. No territory changed hands officially, and impressment wasn't even addressed.
So militarily, it was kind of a draw. Why is it sometimes called the Second War of Independence?
Good question, because despite the military stalemate, the war had significant consequences. For many Americans, just surviving against the might of Britain felt like a victory. It boosted national pride and confidence. Andrew Jackson became a huge national hero.
And it affected Native Americans and westward expansion.
Profoundly. The war broke the remaining power of native tribes east of the Mississippi River, clearing the way for rapid white settlement into the Old Northwest and the Deep South.
What about the U.S.-Canada border?
The war helped solidify that border. It also fostered a stronger sense of separate Canadian identity, born partly out of resisting American invasions.
Yeah, the Federalist Party.
The war was their death knell. Federalists in New England had strongly opposed the war. In late 1814, they held the Hartford Convention to air their grievances, proposing constitutional amendments to weaken Southern power, and even hinting at secession, though mostly affirming states' rights to interpose against federal actions.
How was that received?
Terribly. News of the convention came out right around the same time as news of Jackson's stunning victory at New Orleans. The Federalists looked unpatriotic, even treasonous to many. The party basically collapsed on the national stage soon after. Their concerns about Southern dominance, however, would certainly linger.
So wrapping this all up, what are the big takeaways from this whole securing the Republic period? It feels like a lot happened.
It really was a foundational period, packed with change and tension. You see the birth of the financial system, the rise of political parties, huge debates over the meaning of the Constitution and freedom itself.
We saw the expansion of who participates in politics, even early calls for women's rights, alongside the deepening entrenchment of slavery and the brutal realities faced by Native Americans.
Exactly. The Haitian Revolution, Gabriel's Rebellion, these events show the profound contradictions the nation was wrestling with. Plus, you get the establishment of judicial review, the massive Louisiana Purchase opening up the continent.
And finally, the War of 1812, which sort of asserted a stronger sense of American national identity, even if it ended in a draw.
Right. It really shaped the path forward.
So the deep dive leaves you, our listener, with this thought. All those tensions we've talked about, Hamilton's vision versus Jefferson's, federal power versus states' rights, the meaning of liberty itself, they all first really emerged and clashed in this tumultuous period.
So the question to ponder is, how do those early debates, those different visions of what America should be, continue to echo in our society and politics today? Are we still arguing about some of the same fundamental things?
Something to think about. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into securing the Republic. We hope this gave you a clear, engaging grasp of this absolutely crucial chapter from Foner's Give Me Liberty, and helps you connect the dots in American history.